Hi, welcome back to the conference. Today we're speaking with Karolina Westlund. Karolina is an Associate Professor of Ethology with more than 25 years experience working with animal welfare issues and has published multiple scientific articles relating to behaviour management and animal welfare. She is an experienced and sought-after lecturer who has held seminars in universities for animal guardians, trainers, instructors and consultants in 15 countries. She also teaches virtually foundational and advanced animal training, as well to how to best go about resolving unwanted and challenging behaviour. Karolina is fear-free certified and has a multidisciplinary perspective. Apart from applied ethology, she's also well-versed in behaviour analysis and effective neuroscience. And today we are going to be talking about noise, thunder and fireworks and what to do to help your dog. Enjoy. Hi, Karolina. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back.
Yay, welcome back for, I don't know what year we're on now, but a lot of years. So it's always good to have you. 3, 4, who knows? So today we are talking about noise, thunder, fireworks, and how to help our dogs with this. Something I know is a very interesting topic for lots of people. And hopefully today we'll have some time to think about some of the different types of dogs, developmental stages, things that might be involved there. But I guess a good place to start would be to really get an understanding of how to know if your dog is finding noise unpleasant, because I think sometimes it's very obvious, but other times not so much. So how can you tell?
Well, to start off, I'd just like to throw in there that I actually don't work hands-on with dogs. So I don't have this practical perspective, but rather the sort of theoretical. I read what's out there. I try to find out what evidence there is behind different approaches and sort of what level of evidence there is. So just so you know that, and also that I might be throwing some of these questions right back at you, Holly, because you do know you do work hands-on with dogs. Anyways, so I started researching this like back in 2016. I had this brilliant idea that I wanted to find out everything that there was to know about, noise sensitivity in dogs. So that brought me down some rabbit holes. And one of the things that I realized quite quickly was that many people might not understand or realize when their dog is actually having trouble. So, they might see the very obvious things that the animal is shivering or shaking or whining. They might even vomit from being that upset. They might be, if you leave them in one location, they might destroy the door to get out to where you are. They might follow you around. So those things are, quite obvious to many people. But some of the more nuanced, sort of subtle signs might be that their vigilance goes up, so that they're sort of monitoring the environment. They have this difficulty to relax. They might be attention seeking, and certainly you might see all these subtle signs of fear associated with low, like a crouching body posture. Ears might be back. You might see the salivation. You might see a dilated pupil, perhaps. Tail tucking and pacing and that kind of thing. So that the animal starts showing these, both the big signs of fear, but also these small and subtle signs. And I think what's really important, what stands out really well if you look at the literature, is that if you're seeing these small signs of discomfort, maybe not even fear, but just that the animal is slightly uncomfortable or not quite at ease, that you should take that really seriously, because it can really escalate.
That's such a good, important last point, isn't it? Thinking about that, because sometimes, whether we like to admit this or not, we pay attention to the really annoying stuff. So if my dog is barking nonstop, whining nonstop, jumping, scratching, like you said, sure, I'm probably going to try and do something to help them. But if they're just kind of sitting quietly curled up, I might be like, oh, I can see he's a bit nervous, but
it's okay. And then you just leave it at that. And what we know is that many get worse over time, and that at least 20% of dogs develop some type of noise sensitivity at some point in their life. They might recover from it, but many don't on their own. Only like 4 or 5% do. So they need help. And we also know, so that 20% is a conservative estimate, the lowest I've seen. And we also know that up to 90% or above 90% can be helped if we do step in and actually try to help them overcome that. So we can do something about it, absolutely. But it's good to nip it in the bud, as it were.
Yeah, and I suppose as well the intensity of the behavior isn't necessarily indicative of how strong the dog's feeling, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you might think, oh, well, you're not screaming and shouting. I've got 2 dogs. One is barking out of the window. One is sitting quietly. The one barking must be feeling worse, surely, but not necessarily.
Not necessarily at all. Yeah, that's a really important point you're making, Ollie, that the individual variability is going to be huge here in how they, and also whether they're sort of what we call a if they stress up, so that they're showing these we call it the proactive type of behaviors. They're like fight and flight and really agitated, and some animals stress down, so they tend to be a lot more sort of withdrawn and more observant, and perhaps they might be shaking and cowering, but they're not doing much. So if we're not paying attention, we might miss it altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Same as people. We're exactly the same, right? We stress up or stress down. Yeah.
It's within the whole animal kingdom, really. We have these 2 different coping strategies, the stressing up and the stressing down strategy. So it's really very normal.
I know for myself personally, I'm more of a stress down until I have so much stress that I'm forced to stress up. So it's interesting as well. It can change within the person or the animal as well, I think sometimes. But that's anecdotal. I have not researched that.
Yeah, we have a predisposition to go for one or the other, but certainly we have it within ourselves to use both strategies.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so maybe we could start with, because it feels like there's 2 camps here. So there's I know my dog is potentially worried. How can I prepare them for the next time we encounter this noisy stimulus? And this noisy stimulus is happening today, tomorrow. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I guess the classic, and I know one you speak about a lot, is fireworks. So if, today, let's say today's Monday and tomorrow, oh my gosh, I've seen there's a firework display next door. Is there anything we can do in this short-term window to help our dogs to feel a bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote a blog post about this that's part of the free gift that I'm giving for this interview, which includes also an infographic and the blog post as an ebook. But essentially, when I was starting to research this, I really realized that there were these 2, that it's either the acute situation here and now, like 10 minutes ago, tomorrow, it's with no time to essentially train or have a veterinary visit or anything like that. So you might go and buy something over the counter, but there's not very much more time to prepare. So essentially the first thing to do is to try to make sure that you offer to arrange the environment. So you offer the animal somewhere to be with, where he can perceive as little as possible from whatever's going on. And it should be by choice, ideally, that he can choose to go there and he can choose to leave also. And this and so what we're trying to do is we're trying to block incoming stimuli, because often we'll get what's referred to as trigger stacking, though we'll get, especially with things like thunderstorms, where you have the barometric pressure falling, you have the smell of ozone, you have the electrostatic charges, you have the flash of lightning, and you have the boom of thunder with vibrations also. So it's like all the senses become overloaded. So what we're trying to do is to remove these triggers, so that there's more opportunities for the animal to find calm within himself and to help self-regulate his stress system, if you will. So that's the first thing, to sort of try to remove all the incoming stimuli. So finding somewhere in the building where you're at, where there's as little of that coming in as possible. It might be going down into the basement even,
Yeah.
or into the bathroom or something, where there's as little noise as possible coming in and as few. And if you can't do that, one of the things you can do is just pull the curtains, and that will typically, what happens then is that the flashes come through. So what most people do then is that they make sure that the room is lit, so that there's as little contrast as possible when there's an actual flash outside. Or yeah, so essentially what we're trying to do is to block incoming stimuli. And interestingly, also what we know about how sound propagates is that high frequency sounds, like a fireworks, you know, they it's easier to figure out where they're coming from, and they're also more easily blocked by objects. So you can, you know, if there's fireworks going on outside, if you can block the windows with you know, heavy curtains or even pillows, that will help block that type of high frequency sound.
Yeah.
But for more low frequency sounds, such as from thunder, is more like that sound is non-directional. So it's harder to pinpoint, and that it's, you know, it's confusing for the animals, really confusing, because they don't really know what's going on. And so it's not knowing where the threat is coming from is really stressful. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that those types of low frequency sounds are not as effectively blocked by objects. So there, in such cases, those pillows might not help. So in that case, it might be better to actually, you know, if you have a basement, to go down there during the time.
Yeah.
And also when it comes to other sensory input that the animal is getting, you hear this conversation: should we touch should we pet him when he's scared? And that I would say it depends.
As always.
As with everything in animal behavior, that it depends, because if he's really fearful, he might sensitize, and sensitization is multimodal. In other words, that the sensory modalities are all triggered. So if he's fearful, he's gonna sort of be really startled by these sounds and sights and the smell of ozone, perhaps, and he might be also overly sensitive to touch.
Yeah.
But the animal's body language is likely going to tell you whether touch will calm him down or just get him all the more excited. What we can do is try to mask incoming noise. To go back to noise, is like, you know, running the dishwasher or the washing machine or something. So it's another noise that's blending in with the incoming noise, and so it might be less startling to the animal. It's still noisy, but it might be an improvement in the sort of acoustic environment and overall, anyways. What some people are doing is that and this would obviously require that the animal is used to those things beforehand, but they have these things called, I think they're called muff mutts.
Yep.
That's, you know, some like a noise canceling earphones that you put on the dog's ears, and they have to be used to that. They can absolutely not be a novel thing that you try it here and now if the animal isn't used to that. And sometimes also people put these like a calming cap, I think they're called, like a thing that you put in front of the eyes that also reduces incoming stimuli. But again, the animal would need to be used to both of these. And I think there's no sort of scientific study showing that either of those two actually work, but it's anecdotal. So people who use them claim that it works, but there hasn't been a scientist who have sat down to actually look at it. As is so often the case, that lots of what people are doing is just based on anecdote. And in that blog post I'm referring to, I'm trying to tease apart what we've actually studied in a more sort of scientific, rigorous way, because essentially what happens if we do an intervention like, oh, I'm going to put this calming cap on you, and we're going to the muff mutts and everything. And so I feel like I've done something, so I
Yeah.
expect it to work. And then we get this placebo effect where we think that, oh, it actually worked. But if you were to objectively look at the dog, that might not be the case. So
Mm.
be a little bit mindful, because also, I mean, you could also turn this around and say, well, the fact that you're doing something and you feel that this should work means that you are calmer, and your calm demeanor will influence the dog. We know this too to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's sort
Yeah.
of how to navigate that is a bit tricky sometimes.
It is, isn't it? And I suppose as well, like you may stumble across something by accident that works incredibly well for your dog. It may not
Yeah,
work for 1,000 others, but if it works for
yeah,
your
yeah,
dog, go for it.
yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And so I found when I researched it, I found like 30 plus different techniques or tactics that people have used. And I'm sure that some of them will work for you and
Hmm.
some of them will not. So
Yeah.
part of helping your animal with this will require a little bit of experimentation,
Hmm.
finding out
Yes.
what works. But I think what's really important when you do that is that you don't do too many things at once that will overwhelm the animal. And that also that you keep notes. So you keep track of what works and what doesn't, what you've tried.
Mm. I suppose as well,
Um,
if you try and do everything at once, you don't know what worked.
yeah,
So if you
yeah,
plug in a diffuser and you use
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
calm cap, you're like, well, I don't know which one it was. So yeah, one at a
yeah,
time. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Or I mean, if you do try many of them and they work, then at least the animal hasn't had to suffer through that episode. But as you're saying, you don't know what it was about it that actually
Yeah.
was the the lock that turned the key that turned the lock. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to some of the things that you might do as in this acute scenario when there's fireworks today. What am I going to do?
Hmm.
Is also consider the sense of smell. That it might be a good idea to just, if you create this little cozy den that's sort of inviting and cozy, and you want to sort of prepare it in a way that the animal feels, oh, this is like, the kind of feeling you have when you go to a spa, when it's like, oh my God, it's so nice and cozy and inviting and warm and lovely, is to perhaps also add like a t-shirt that you've been wearing,
Hmm.
assuming that you have a good relationship with your animal, that your smell can really help them, perhaps. Again, for some animals, this is not going to work, I'm sure, but for
Hmm.
some, it might, that might help them calm down. Um, and so, and also that what we're doing is that we might do some masking. So we're playing other types of noise that masks the incoming noise,
Hmm.
or we're having the light on in the room that masks the incoming light. But we might also use distractions, which is essentially that we're presenting the animal with something that requires his attention. And when the attention shifts, the attention to whatever's going on outside might diminish also. So, a really juicy marrow bone or playing a vigorous game. And again, you might want to think twice about revving the animal up too much.
Hmm.
Perhaps a calming massage is better, but just doing something with the animal, like a squishy toy, uh, yeah, anything that will sort of help him change his focus from whatever's going on outside.
Hmm.
So that, and also if we're doing these things, we are changing the animal's emotional state or his mood state,
Hmm.
which means that he might still notice what's going on, but if he's in a good mood, then he's more optimistic about the world, and so the interpretation of what's going on will be different than if he's in a negative mood state. So that
Mm.
could really help sort of facilitate or set the animal up so that he doesn't freak out completely if he does perceive or she does perceive what's going on outside.
That's
Um,
interesting because I'm thinking if you knew, for example, that the fireworks normally kicked off as soon as it went dark at 7 p.m., let's say, if you try to get him into that positive mood state, maybe like 45 minutes prior, could that have a benefit rather than, uh-oh, here we go, and he's already
absolutely.
stressed? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that if you are already in a positive mood state, then anything that would normally trigger you or set you off will be sort of you might be both less likely to even notice it, but even if you do notice it, you'll be less likely to be triggered by it.
Mm-hmm.
But once you have been triggered by it, changing that mood state is a lot more difficult, because once the animal is triggered and he's like vigilant and scared, then we have this thing called negativity bias, in that we're sort of predisposed to pay attention to negative things because it's the way to survive. You know, if there's a lion running after you, you need to be focused on that lion. Nobody can come up to you and say, hey, you want to play this game? You're like, there's a lion behind me. I need to pay attention to that. So once they are scared, it can be really quite difficult to engage them. Which is why it's so important to try to diminish. So the whole purpose of this is really to diminish the number of incoming stimuli so that the animal can remain in a sort of rational frame of mind where he is still interested in, the food toys or the tugs or the squeaky toys or the marrow bone or whatever it is that you're offering. Because if he gets too aroused and too in a negative emotional state, those things are not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's important to sort of top up the Optimism Bank. So to ensure that he's in a good mood state before
it
all hell breaks
begins.
loose. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So that would be sort of the first thing to think about when there's noise today. The second thing would be to look at our own behavior. To consider, how am I talked about self-regulation, that the animal can sort of calm down, but there's also this thing called co-regulation, which is essentially that your state of mind, if you're all upset and worried and you're like, oh my God, there's fireworks and I'm so upset, you're transmitting that to the animal. So if you can, take a few deep breaths. We know that deep breaths are really a good way to help you yourself self-regulate. So your autonomic system gets calm. Then you're in a much better position to help your fearful animal. And also the tone of voice. And this is also anecdotal, but just thinking about how you, if you're talking like this, that we think of that as sort of playful, but it could also come across as fearful. And the same thing with being overly consoling. Oh, baby boy, that is also a tone of voice that the animal might have learned is associated with when he's feeling bad. So maybe a neutral tone of voice is something to try first before going to any of those other extremes. Another thing to think about is to, even if you haven't had the time to do any training, one thing to do, especially if the animal isn't too fearful, is to, every time that there's a thunderclap, to throw some food on the floor. Which essentially means that you need to carry food on your body at all times when the fireworks or the thunder is about to happen. So that you can essentially, oh, there's a thunder clap, boom, there's food. Thunderclap, food. Thunderclap, food. So the animal learns that thunderclaps are actually great because they predict food.
Yes.
Where's the food, Mom? Yeah. So they, it's and this is ideally something that you want to do when there's time, but you can do it because if the animal is willing to eat, at the very least, what's going on is that his focus is not entirely on what's going on in the environment, but he's also eating, and that helps sort of calm the nervous system down a little bit.
Yeah. And I guess for those that are watching that are like, my dog would never take food, that,
Yeah,
like you said, it just means that they are too heightened, too
yeah,
frightened right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Scales to this
And
stuff.
and about the petting, you sometimes hear that, oh no, you shouldn't pet a frightened animal because you reinforce the fear. That is absolutely wrong, I think.
Yes.
That you can't reinforce, you can't, reinforcement is an operant term. It's like the animal does something to get something that he wants. So it's not that he's showing fearful behavior to get something from you that he wants. He's showing fearful behavior because he's having an emotional reaction. And if you help calm him down, he's actually going to feel better and he's going to show less of that behavior. It's like in a negative feedback loop rather than in a
Yeah.
positive feedback loop. But there are a couple of different scenarios when potentially petting could make things worse. One of them being that if he's used to coming up to you and you're petting him and he feels good from that, like normally we get this like oxytocin fix when we're getting that massage. So he's used to, when I'm petted by mum, I feel better. But if he's really upset and he comes up to you and you pet him and he doesn't feel better because he's too wound up, he might start sort of climbing and scratching and becoming almost frantic. And I don't know if you've seen, but I've certainly, when I talk to people about these, they say that, oh yeah, that sometimes happens with certain individuals, is that they get all revved up, like almost like an extinction burst, if you will. That this, I should be going to mummy because then I feel better, and they get really wound up. The other thing I already touched on, that they might find touch aversive if they're sensitized, is like they're too aroused and there's too much incoming information, and so touch is like is aversive even for that animal. And the third thing could also be that that there's not operant learning, but classical conditioning going on. In other words, that's if the timing is unfortunate, so that you're caressing the dog and then there's a thunderclap. You're caressing the dog, thunder. So you're caressing the dog becomes a predictor of the scary thing.
Yeah.
So the caresses also means that, so the animal could even sort of start fearing or being, being very averse to being touched, because they think that, oh, the bad thing is going to happen.
That's an interesting point, and I think that's probably really relevant for those dogs that are sensitive to noises that happen every day, right? Because some of us live in places where there's lots of storms for sure, but I'm thinking about the dogs where the neighborhood dog barks relentlessly, and every time that dog barks, your dog goes, and they get really stressed by it. That, if that's happening every single day, and like you say, you're trying to comfort them by stroking them, and then it's woof, oh, stroke, woof, then you could see how that could quite quickly become aversive for sure.
Which brings us to, I'm looking down at my list here because I can't keep all of this in my head because there's just so many different things that people do. Which brings us to something closely related to this, which is deep pressure. And there's some really interesting studies. I think Temple Grandin was one of the pioneers in this area, looking at, because essentially I think the theory sort of brings us back to when we mammals were in our mother's womb and we were in a really tight squeeze, and that tight squeeze has a calming effect. So people use these pressure garments, like a vest you put on the dog, and you need to close it so that it wraps really tightly around the torso. And that triggers like a physiological calming effect. That's been quite well documented. Thunder shirt, I think, is one of those garments that people.
Yeah, you can get them quite easily. I have tried that. I found one of my dogs made zero impact whatsoever. One, it really helped, but what was really interesting was one of my dogs lying on top of the other one when she was scared, of his own volition, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with the other dog, and watching her visibly calm.
Yeah.
which was amazing. Like it brought tears to my eyes because I was like, wow, this is incredible. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was very different. And I think it was much a heavier load, so like
Yeah.
28 kilos lying on you. Not
Yeah.
wrapped obviously the whole way around her body, but enough to
Mm.
feel like safe, I think. Because she could
Yeah.
easily have she could have got up and moved away if she
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
to. But yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was going to suggest. If you don't have one of those pressure garments, is simply leaning on the animal. And again, it's highly individual whether the animal is going to accept that or not, and you know the type of relationship you have and anything. But actually putting some pressure on the torso
Yeah.
can for some animals help them calm down in that scenario.
And that's hugely documented in people as well. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's one of these weird things that probably relate back to, 9 months in the womb for us humans, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we have the smells and the pheromones. And so these are things that you might not have in the house, but there might be time to just run out and do some shopping. And some of the smells that have actually been documented in scientific studies to reduce anxiety are lavender and chamomile. And then we have the pheromones, which is for dogs, Adaptil, essentially a mama pheromone that you can plug into your electric outlet, or there's a spray also, I believe.
Yeah.
That helps. So pheromones are sort of species-specific smells that tend to induce an emotional state that's that in this case is calming. So it's one of these mama, the mother smells like this, and so by plugging that into the wall, you have this calming effect. Another category to look into, if the fireworks are starting, maybe not within a couple of minutes, but within the next few hours, is just to consider when to take the last walk.
Yeah.
Perhaps go for a walk and drain some energy if there's time. Make sure that the animal is on a leash, so and is also chip marked, because if something happens and he goes off, the data suggests that not many animals make it back again. So it's like very depressing. Like I can't remember now, but it's really something to consider. When to do the last pee stop, and ideally having like a toilet cue for the animal. Please pee now.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to know, because we're gonna have to be inside for the next 5 hours or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Massage might be one thing too, also to sort of put the animal to, help the animal come about or go into that more beneficial mood state or frame of mind before things start happening.
Yes.
Then we have diet and medication. So there are a couple of diets that have been shown to sort of reduce overall anxiety and fear, but some of them take weeks to come into effect, like the Calm canine diet. But there's one supplement that's called Calmex that takes effect in like 30 to 60 minutes. So that's one of these things that have been proven to sort of take the top off that reaction. So with several of these different approaches, I'm sure that you can sort of help reduce. The animal might not be happy about what's going on, but he might go from being frantic to being slightly worried, so anything that can help reduce that ladder of escalation, I think, is a good thing.
Definitely.
Some people are using these non-psychoactive cannabinoids, like CBD. And this is one of those areas I don't know very much about this, and I just, from what I read, there's like the scientific literature is not up to date with this as of yet. There's nothing. There's actually one study on fear of noise, particularly, where it didn't show an effect. It has been shown to have effect on pain, And we know
Yes.
that pain can exacerbate reactions, you know, and we'll get to pain later on.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly it's something that I think we need to know more about. It's important if you're using those that it's not contaminated with the psychoactive ingredients that are called THC, because
Yeah.
it's toxic to dogs. And also there's some concerning data that it might interfere with some liver enzymes. So it's something I think that we should be mindful of
Mm-hmm.
before going in with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and so this sort of summarizes all the things that you can do if we have this. It's starting now, and again, I just want to reiterate that it's really important to be mindful that we're not overwhelming the animal by doing too much strange new things at once, and also to be observant and see what seems to happen, what seems to work and what seems not to work so well.
I think it's really reassuring because actually hearing all of that together, there's a lot, right? Because
Well,
often we feel powerless. We feel like, oh my gosh, well, I'm just going to have to ride this out for the next week because it's New Year and there's going to be loads of fireworks. But there's a lot of options there, and none of them wildly expensive, wildly hard to do, like things that you could do most of them without any real prep, like you said. So yeah, that's really helpful.
I think it's important not to trivialize this, because it can become a real problem for sure.
Yeah.
That sort of trickles into other aspects of life also, that the animal can sort of develop a generalized anxiety condition that's really difficult to tackle. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So should we have a think then now about preparatory stuff? So when you do have a little bit of time to prepare for the scary day.
Yeah. And I think that there's really three things to consider there. There's again, it's our behavior. And I think this is where the most important thing is really to commit to doing something.
Yeah.
Because if, you know, it's we always perform better than when there's a deadline. It's like you have to do it now because in 2 days something bad is going to happen. But it's really great if you can have some time so that you really, in the off season, that you're actually spending that time doing something. And finding that motivation to do that can be really difficult when, you know, there's not going to be a firestorm for 3 months or a thunderstorm for 3 months. Why should I start training my dog now? You know.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So just to sort of to commit to doing that, I think is important. That it's going to take some time, but you should be seeing some improvement within the first month. And what you need to be doing is you need to address the animal's learning that they learn, and people do this in a couple of different ways. One of them being like a systematic desensitization and a classical conditioning. So essentially what we're doing is systematic desensitization means that we're gradually introducing, this is the scary thing, that we're gradually introducing it over many, 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 many repetitions, so that and we're always making sure that the animal is comfortable and under threshold, so he doesn't become all excited and worked up. But it should be introduced so gradually that the animal learns over time that it's not dangerous.
Yeah.
So it's essentially what people do is they play like recordings of thunder or fireworks. And sometimes we have it masked. So the sound is masked in, there's like, let's see what it's called. The Canine Noise Phobia series is a series of recordings that you can, I think you need to buy it. I don't think it's free access, but where there's music that was especially prepared to be calming to dogs, that masks these noises as they're gradually introduced. So, you know, track 1, it's really, really low, it's almost imperceptible, and track 10 is like right there in your face, really loud noises, but all of them are masked. And if you do that very gradually, then the animal, at the end of it, you're going to be able to play that really loud sound
Boom.
noise.
Yeah.
And typically what you do is that you combine this, so the systematic desensitization, where gradual introduction, you combine it with counter conditioning, so that each little boom is followed by something the animal really likes, such as a treat. So the boom and the treat and the boom and the treat and the boom and the treat. And so over time, the animal will learn that, oh, when I'm hearing these sounds, they are predictors of good things.
Yeah.
But and we don't really have time now to go into this. And it is, there are a couple of different ways that this could go wrong.
Yep.
So, people progress too quickly, or the goodies aren't good enough, or the animal, there's not time. The animal has to be relaxed in between these presentations, so that you're not sort of building more arousal over time. So but it's something to look into. Let's just leave it at that for now, because
Yeah, and I suppose if it is something that's causing you a lot of stress and causing your dog a lot of stress, that is often a time to get the help of a professional to help you with this, so that you do it in the right way. You don't take it too quickly. You don't accidentally sensitize your dog rather than desensitizing, all of that stuff. So yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
Great, yeah. The other thing that people do is they do conditioned relaxation. And it's also actually been found to be as effective as this counterconditioning desensitization protocol. Essentially teaching the animal that, in this location, on this blanket, I feel calm and relaxed. And when I'm smelling this smell and when I'm hearing these, you might condition several different stimuli. So both the touch, the smell, and some type of noise. It might be something that you say, or it might be certain music that you condition. So you play it as you're giving the animal massage. So the animal learns to associate that smell, those sounds, that location, that blanket, or something soft and cuddly with feeling relaxed, so that when the noise is starting, you can help the animal, you can evoke that emotional state by providing those stimuli that the animal has learned already.
It's like, go to your happy place.
Go to your happy place, absolutely, yeah. But again, I think that's also something that you might want to have to get help with, perhaps, so that you get it right and actually manage to establish that. The second thing that I would suggest doing, or the third, during this off season, is that if your animal is really having a problem, that you go see a vet. And not only to see if medication is perhaps warranted. And sometimes medication can really help normalize the brain chemistry. And so all of that training that you're doing takes effect a lot better. But also what you want to do is rule out that there's something else going on. So things such as pain that we know tends to sensitize animals to other things that impact their mood. So they tend to be grumpier and more stressed when they are in pain. We also know some things that are directly related to noise sensitivity is gastrointestinal problems and cognitive decline. So it could be if your animal, if your dog is getting old and he's never had a problem with the noise, and all of a sudden New Year's Eve and your dog freaks out, you should see a vet to rule out that he's not in pain, that he's not having these gastrointestinal problems, and that he's not going into cognitive decline.
Yeah, definitely. Because it can be alarming when you see a sudden behavior change, right? That's never been there before, but that is key information. Your dog is saying, I need help somewhere. Yeah.
And certainly you can also get medication from the vets, and I'm not a vet myself, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what to do, other than that some of those, they could be either sort of long-term mood changers that the animal could be eating for weeks or months, or they could be fast-acting sort of anxiolytics or even sedatives. And some of those have amnesic properties. In other words, that the animal will both be a little sort of sedated, and he also won't remember much of what happened.
Yeah.
Which could help you if you're sort of trying to overcome noise phobia, is that he won't remember much of those noise episodes if you do that right. Some of the things to look out for is, and the reason why you absolutely need to consult a vet, is that there might be side effects of some of these compounds, and also that they should be given before the animal shows any signs of fear. That if the animal starts showing fear and you give them after that, it might actually make things worse. So you should definitely discuss this with your veterinarian.
Yeah.
And again, to keep a log of what works and what doesn't.
Very important. It also helps you to see progress, because I think often, like you said, with that negativity bias, we also interpret that in terms of stuff we're doing with our dogs. Oh, it's still really bad, nothing's working. But actually, look at the
Absolutely.
progress
Yeah.
log. Things are better.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, such an important point you're making, that we tend to focus on what's not working. We tend not to notice when things are getting better. And sometimes it's the improvement is so incremental that we hardly see it.
It's like when you see someone you haven't seen for a long time and they're like, you look so different, or you are so different. You think, am I?
Yeah.
I'm with myself every day. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So interesting, so helpful. Thank you. I know people that are struggling with this will hopefully feel really reassured by all of that, because there are options, lots of options, to help your dog to feel better. And I suppose listening to what you were saying about the preparatory stuff, it's not always easy to motivate yourself, right? Because this is not fun training, this is not
Yeah.
fun activities,
Yeah.
but overall, like, the mental health benefit, not just for your dog, but for you, to know that the next time things will be a bit easier, feels worth it, I think. Yeah,
Absolutely, I
definitely.
think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can we
amazing.
say something a little bit about prevention also before we wrap this up?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah, so essentially, if you have a new puppy and he's not fearful of noise, that is fantastic. And we want it to stay that way
Yeah.
because, as I said, many dogs do develop that over time. You're not, maybe not the first season, but the second. So it's and I think some of the important things to consider is the importance of having like a positive outlook on life, like a positive mood state, that even though something might happen, that they are resilient and sort of have the coping mechanisms to deal with that without falling into despair, I think is really important. But also doing a lot of that, playing the sounds and doing the counter conditioning. You can do that also as a preventative measure so that the animal gets used to those noises, and so it's like bang, and then you get food, bang, and then you get food, so that the day when the fireworks are shot, the animal will be like, yeah, I know that, I've heard that before. Where's the food, Mom?
Yeah.
So essentially, and then just sort of being observant and ready to take action and use all the other things that we've discussed. Yeah.
And it can be stuff in your home as well. So lots of dogs are sensitive to like the sound of metal. So like if you in Europe, we tend to dry our clothes on airers. I know that's not the case in other parts of the world where you guys use tumble dryers, but we have these like metal airers in the UK, certainly, where we kind of open it up and dry the clothes on there. They make a weird noise, clang, bang, like the sweeping of the broom. Occasionally dogs are stimulated by the movement, but sometimes it's the sound. So every you got a young puppy, every time I get that air out, I'm chucking a treat at their head, like, this is a good thing. So that just makes your day-to-day life easier, because if that's an object that you're using a few times a week for the rest of their lives, you don't want every time you get that out for them to do this and hide in the corner. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Brilliant.
just being mindful of your animal's emotional experiences will help prepare you so that you're more observant the day these types of things start happening also, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Real. I know you told us a little bit about your freebie already, but do you just remind us of what that is so that people can go and grab it?
Yeah, it's essentially this blog post that I update twice a year, where I try to include any new scientific studies that come out that look into any of these existing mechanisms or approaches that people are using, and also novel approaches. And there's an infographic and an ebook there as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And just lastly, where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, my company is called Elise Animal Behavior Courses, and I do believe you're sharing my Facebook page and perhaps also my webpage. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. All of those places. Well, thank you again, Karolina. Always a pleasure to have you.
So great to be here.
Thanks.